Everyone on the internet wants to tell you what mods you should do to your car. Heck, I've even recently started the series where I dive into aftermarket parts and cover as much details about them as I can. But of course, part of the reason I'm doing that series is just to give you guys as much information as I can about those products so you can decide if they're right for you, and hopefully that way they don't end up as one of your regretful modifications. And this video is just that. I'm going to list off 5 modifications that I caution you to do on your EVO. And I'll also be covering why people tend to do modifications like this in the first place, the reasons why you potentially shouldn't be doing them, and also give you a couple alternative solutions if you do really want to do these modifications. With that, we'll jump into the 5 modifications you probably shouldn't do to your EVO. Number 5 is roll or pull your fenders. Why do people do it? Well, it's simple. You usually want to make room for wider tires under your car and you want them to fit without rubbing. So why shouldn't you do it? Well, the main reason and the first thing that comes to mind for me is that this is basically an irreversible mod. Once you do this, there's really no going back, especially when it comes to the rear quarter panels. And oftentimes, even worse, people consider this like a cheap and easy mod. It's like, hey, I'll just find my friend that spent 50 or 100 bucks on a fender roller, I'll borrow that, or maybe I'll just have him do it even though he's only done it like once or twice. And the end result can be just like a choppy, horrible, wavy body line that looks awful. So not only are you potentially screwing up the body lines of your car, you could be screwing up your paint in the process as well. So please don't do this if you're not a professional or if you don't have plans to take it to a body shop after. So what can you do instead? Well, of course, you can look for the best wheel fitment. You got to find the right offset, find the right wheels, do some research, and find out what wheel and tire combination works best for you. It can also help to get a good aftermarket set of coilovers or something that can give you more wheel clearance kind of on the inside track of your car. But of course, be careful with that too, because a common modification people end up regretting is buying some cheap coilovers. But if you absolutely do want to have this done, I mean, it can be done right, it can be done properly. I just recommend you do take it to someone that has some experience and talk to them about how far you actually want your fenders to be pulled, how drastic you want this change to be, how much rolling will be needed, all that kind of stuff, so you don't end up regretting something, again, that you really can't change. The number 4 regretful mod is that mini tiny battery people like to run. So why do people do this? Well, generally it's just weight savings, and it is weight savings in a good area where you want to save weight on an EVO. The stock location battery on the EVO is under the hood at the front of the car, and it's kind of up high. And those are places you do want to remove weight from an EVO because there's a lot of weight towards the front, and anytime you can remove weight that's higher up on a car, it's usually better kind of for handling. But why shouldn't you do it? Well, that really comes down to basically reliability and convenience. These batteries just don't last as long, so a lot of times you can end up with a dead battery when that's never going to be convenient or fun for you, and it might make you kind of hate your car. And this is especially true if you live in colder climates or places with extreme heat, because of course extreme cold and extreme heat are harder on batteries. So what should you do instead if you really need these weight savings? Well, I will say I feel like battery technology, through the advancement of EVs and stuff is getting better. So hopefully this is kind of a problem of the past with these mini batteries. But I do know there's some new technology with the anti-gravity batteries, stuff like that, where they're a bit bigger sized yet, but they're also really light. So there are becoming more and more options to these standard mini batteries people used to like to run. So I would do some research and try to find out, what kind of new battery might work best for you to still get you your weight savings, but also not be something that's just going to be dead on you when you really need it. The number 3 modification you may regret is choosing the wrong clutch. So why would people do this mod? Of course, that seems like the obvious one, right? We add horsepower, we add torque, especially to the EVOs, and then the stock clutch can't handle it. So you do need to do this upgrade. You need to pick a different clutch. The problem kind of ends up being there are so many different options to choose from and different style clutches. You got single disc, you got twin disc, you got triple disc, you got sprung, you got unsprung, you got full face, you got puck style, and any kind of different combination of all the things I just said. So the why shouldn't you do it? Of course, this ties back to you kind of have to do it, but the reason people regret it is basically they just pick the wrong one. They don't do enough research to find out what they really want for drivability in their EVO. So what should you do here? Of course, it's about doing your own research. And not only that, it's about knowing what you want, what you're going to be using your car for. If you're fine with like a heavier pedal feel and you just want your clutch to be quiet, then maybe a single disc ACT is right for you. Are you going to be drag racing a lot and you don't really care about the noise? Then maybe you need an exidy twin or triple disc clutch. Something like that might be your best option in that case. Either way, you just got to know what is really more important to you, whether it be pedal feel, noise, drivability, or like how long it's going to last under certain circumstances. Again, if you're just daily driving, it's going to be different than if you're drag racing a lot or even doing road course stuff. And of course, nice little plug, I did do a full long video comparing the ACT twin disc to the exidy twin disc, since I do have those two clutches in my EVOs. So if you just want to get like a longer in-depth opinion of mine on those two clutches, just feel free to watch that video. The number 2 regrettable mod is solid or very stiff motor mounts and bushings. And why do people do this mod? Well, in general, it's supposed to tighten up the area wherever it's been installed. And typically that's supposed to increase like throttle response or just general tightness feeling in the car. So when you're driving it, you can feel like more connected to the car, reduce any kind of sloppiness that you might feel. So then why shouldn't you do it? Well, it comes down to NVH, all the noise, the vibrations that these can add, especially if you do too many of them. And you can change a lot of different mounts. You can change your engine mounts, you can change transmission mounts, rear differential mounts, any control arm type of bushing, be it the front or the rear. All those options you could change from an OEM rubber that's going to have some more flexibility and a bit more slop in it, but also give you a bit quieter ride and a bit better, regular daily drive. You can swap all those out for something harder and more solid. So what should you do here? Well, I think this is just like a fine line modification type of thing. You can certainly swap out some of these mounts. It's just, I typically wouldn't recommend like changing a whole bunch at once. And just think about why you're installing certain mounts. If you're just doing it because you wanted to buy something different for your car, it's probably not right for you. However, with the EVO, they're notoriously known to have, under hard and fast shifting, there's a loud clunk in the rear that can happen. And that's typically that mustache bar in the back. And if you just change out those two bushings, it could just help that clunk from happening, and it might not add a whole bunch of extra vibration to your car in the process. And more towards the front of the car, if you're maybe experiencing some shifting issues or you're getting wheel hop or something, it might not be a bad idea to try swapping out 1 or 2 of those engine or transmissions mounts to just kind of keep things a bit more solid up at the front of the car. But you probably just don't want to go changing like all 4 at once, because most likely that's going to come into some issues where you feel everything and your car's kind of always shaking when you're just sitting there at an idle. And a fun side note, I asked my Instagram followers to tell me what their most regrettable modification is, and this was actually the most popular one. Most people did say that it was some form of motor mount or solid bushing or something like that that caused a lot of vibration in their car. That was their number 1 issue. However, that is not going to be my number 1 regretful modification for you. My number 1 regretful modification could be a bigger turbo. And again, the why people do this one seems obvious on paper. I mean, it's fun on paper to be like, I have an 800 horsepower EVO. I have this awesome shiny forward-facing turbo. It's just a fun item to actually purchase. It's fun to look at different ones and buy a big turbo and tell everyone that you bought a big turbo. So why not? Why not slap on that big turbo and just go have some fun? Well, 2 main reasons here. Number 1, you probably don't actually have the supporting mods you need yet to really get the most out of that turbo. And number 2, peak horsepower numbers don't necessarily correlate to a fast and fun car. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm mostly talking about how a larger turbo typically changes your power band range and brings it up higher in the RPMs. And by power band, I'm basically just referring to the RPM range where your car has a good amount of horsepower and torque. And on an EVO, of course, your power band is heavily influenced by how quickly your turbo will spool. Now, if we take, for example, the OEM EVO 8 and 9 turbo, you're having full spool at least by 3,500 RPMs, and you have a good power band basically from 3,500, probably all the way up to 6,500. You might be dropping off a little bit after that. But now if you take a larger turbo on there, it's typically going to spool later in the RPM range, which means you've now shifted your power band. So your full power isn't probably going to start, or a good power band, not even full power, but a good power band might not start until 5,000 RPMs. But that bigger turbo is probably designed to push, 5,000 RPMs up to flow more air up in the higher RPM range, meaning you could go to 8,500, maybe 9,000 RPMs. And that sounds great, right? But again, if you don't have the right modifications to your engine to support that, all you really did was lose that power down at the low end. So now you have less power below 5,000 RPMs than you would have had with that original turbo. But hey, you can tell people you got a big turbo now, right? So what should you do? Well, of course, a lot of people do run the bigger turbos, and referring to my number one point prior, really you need to have kind of a deep pocketbook. You need to have those modifications in place first, where you upgraded your engine for sure, and probably a lot of your drivetrain components, so you can utilize that higher RPM band in your engine. Another recommendation is, of course, just to do a lot of research before you buy any turbo. Kind of know what your goals are, know if you're fine with that smaller power band that's shifted up. If you're just drag racing and you can always stay in that high RPM range, that might be fine for you if it's just a smaller power band. However, if you are kind of trying to have some street fun with it, or you're taking it to road course and stuff like that, you probably want a wider power band so you can stay in boost and stay in power when you need it. And another thing to do is kind of just buy a new turbo, not only to avoid the hassle of never knowing what you're going to get with used. Kind of a lot like battery technology that we talked about earlier, turbo technology has come quite a long ways. So honestly, some of the stuff I mentioned as a drawback about slow or late boost can be more of an issue of the past if you pick the right turbo. Some of the turbos that you can get now for the EVO could have some very, very good spool, come on just about as quick as an OEM one, but yet give you that advantage of that like wider power band and give you a lot more power up at the top RPM range. So typically today's big turbos aren't quite as leggy as turbos of the past, but of course, do your own research before you buy something. So there you have it. Those are just my opinions on some of the top 5 most regretful mods people might do to their EVO. And of course, for some general context here, I'm mostly talking about street-driven EVOs. If you are doing a full track car, some of this stuff is going to be way different for you. You may not care if your car shakes a lot at a stoplight if you're mostly using it for track use. So of course, keep that in mind when you're, commenting to me about what mod may or may not be right for you. But please do leave your comment. I am curious to know what was your most regretful mod that you did in your EVO, or what I saw with some of my comments on Instagram was people kind of talked about the mod the previous owner did to the car that they bought that they had to change immediately after they got the car. And just for fun, a few honorable mention items that people talked about on Instagram when they got back to me. An O2 or external dump on the exhaust, kind of just being too loud of an exhaust in general. That was kind of a common theme I saw there. Removing your AC, of course, creature comfort. It's good to probably keep your AC in most circumstances. It doesn't really pay to actually take that out, so that was another one. And then the other item was really just some people, like if you buy something like a narrow band gauge to monitor your air to fuel ratio, just buy a wideband right off the start. Don't bother with the cheap narrow band, just go right to the wideband where you actually get a gauge and a good proper readout. So that's it, guys. Again, those are just my general opinions, my thoughts after being in the EVO game for quite a while. A couple of things I thought would be worth sharing with you guys. So as always, this is Paul from Boosted Film saying thanks so much for watching. Why shouldn't you upgrade to this bigger, funner turbo? Funner? Cold. You feel alive, let's hit the dance floor. Don't work too hard, might break a backbone.